Hello there. You probably have a few questions. What is this? Where are we? Did you finally finish part 2 of the carried value series you started 6 months ago? Well, not exactly. If you're new here, this is a show where I talk about things in the Proving Ground circuit that I think are interesting. We're going to take a look at some numbers, maybe make some graphs. We'll talk about some important things and some not so important things. All that matters is you have some fun along the way. Maybe learn a thing or two. Oh, and we're sponsored by Unified now. Which reminds me. Much better. Welcome back to Fruit for Thought. Unified's first Proving Ground Circuit qualifier is about to get underway, with 16 of the best teams Amateur has to offer taken to the Rift to try and start Season 12 off on the right foot. With all the new teams and so many roster announcements, it can be difficult to navigate through all the lineups to figure out who is strong and who we can expect to perform well. Where do we start? In traditional sports, one of the main storylines at the beginning of every season always seems to revolve around the reigning champions. What was it about that team that made them so good? And do they have the potential to do it again? This mindset's a bit less popular here in the Amateur League of Legends space. With short contracts and constant promotions to higher levels of play, roster turnover for PGC orgs is often insanely high, with very few players remaining on a team for more than a split, let alone between off-seasons. With none of the main cores of any semi-pro team from last split sticking together, it seems like there would be very little correlation between who's good now and who was good before. But let's take a look anyway. Before we go any further, we have to define who the reigning champions of semi-pro are. The most obvious answer here is Wildcard, whose main roster won all 3 Summer Tier 2 tournaments and finished the highest out of any non-academy team at Proving Grounds. However, another argument can be made for 100 Thieves next. While they didn't perform as well as Wildcard throughout any of the Tier 2 tournaments, they did have 3 of their players promoted up to 100 Thieves Academy mid-season, and with their help, literally won Proving Grounds. Technicalities aside, it's safe to say that both 100 Next and Wildcard sat at the top of the amateur space in their own way this year. Let's see how they did it. At this point, it's important to note that success in semi-pro is defined a little bit differently than at the professional level. While winning tournaments and performing well is obviously important for both the players and the teams, it's also important to develop newer, younger players into academy-level talent. While this is an overarching goal for the entirety of the amateur scene, each team has their own little incentives for developing prospects and getting people promoted. For LCS organizations like 100 Thieves and Evil Geniuses, developing young talent on your amateur team gets you early access to players who have the potential to transform into the region's next resident superstar. For independent organizations such as Wildcard, getting players into Academy is important economically. The LCS awards development fees to teams who get players promoted into Academy or LCS in the next season. This money can serve as a valuable income source for some of these organizations, who thus make it their goal to promote as many players as possible. So, those are the 2 main goals of an amateur roster. Luckily for teams, these 2 concepts seem to work hand in hand at times. If you have really good, solid players to teach your rookies, they'll get better faster. And if your young players are playing better and better, chances are, you win more. Surrounding new talent with veterans is obviously far from a foreign concept. It's commonplace in Academy, LCS, and even traditional sports. But only a few teams at the top of the amateur sphere have gone for this sort of methodology. Can you guess who they are? Here we have the experience levels of every player on Wildcard Red's 2021 summer roster at the time they were acquired. Recorded games played at the professional level are in blue, Academy or Challenger Series games are in red, and amateur and collegiate matches are in yellow. Right away, we see a pretty obvious split between young development pieces and proven, experienced veterans. Bradley, Daption, and Winston to an extent were brought in as super high skill ceiling players without that much experience. In contrast, you have Brandini, Dokla, and literal LCS MVP turned player coach Arrow. While they might be more well-known quantities, these players played exceptionally well throughout the season, as well as using their experience to help some of the younger players hone their craft. 100 Thieves next is a really interesting case to look at. After some disappointing finishes with essentially a 5-rookie lineup in the spring split, 100 Thieves decided to bring in Gamsu, who has had storied careers in both League of Legends and Overwatch. Not only was Gamsu able to help 100 Next dramatically improve their standings throughout the Tier 2s, but many of the younger players also saw immense jumps in their play throughout the summer. At the end of the day, not only did Wildcard and 100 Next find success in the summer Proving Ground circuit, but 7 of their players have found themselves on Academy teams at the start of 2022. I'd call that a mission success. This leads us back to our original question. Are the reigning champs of Amateur ready to run it back in 2022? Even though none of the players on either of these teams are coming back to their respective rosters, it seems like both orgs decided to build in a similar way with the hopes of doing well and getting players promoted. On the side of Wildcard, their top side of Alorum and Griffin are two of the smartest, most storied players in the scene, with over a decade of experience between them at all 3 levels of play. As for young talent, all eyes will be on Minwei, who showed promise as both a weak side and strong side carry in Wildcard's developmental system in 2021. And make sure to watch out for Strumpus and Rhino, 2 players who did very well in Amateur last year and are looking to take that next step to get back into Academy. Like last year, 100 Next roster has considerably less games than Wildcards, but the strategy still remains. The big name here is Insanity, who was Immortal's LCS mid laner for the past year and a half. He'll be bringing his experience to a roster full of potential, with amateur superstars Array and Fnatic, a role-swapping sword, and of course, the 15-year-old prodigy General Sniper. Both Wildcard and 100 Thieves Next built rosters that promoted both success and talent development last summer. Going into 2022, these orgs kept to their strategy, forming teams filled with players who could realistically be promoted, and more importantly, can win. The fun's about to begin. Hope you're ready.